Hello and welcome to Newsmakers for this Tuesday, October 22nd, 2024. I'm Louie and thanks for joining us today. And on today's show, very pleased to welcome back to the show Ward 8 Councillor John Paul Danko. Councillor Danko, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
We are just over a week away from Halloween. The hard-hitting question to kick it off. What does the Danko household hand out to trick-or-treaters on Halloween?
Oh, definitely chocolate bars, because I need to get my fill before they go out. And we buy that multi-pack that's got like the Coffee Crisp, Arrow, and Smarties. And by Halloween, all that's left is the Smarties. So the kids get those, we get the rest.
You don't like Smarties. You're not a Smarties guy.
Oh no, Smarties are terrible.
So I live in an apartment, so we don't get trick-or-treaters, but I do. I'm a big fan of the next day, like Shoppers Drug Mart, like grocery store run where everything's 50% off, but probably not the healthiest option at all.
Yeah, but it's once a year. So what are you going to do?
It's once a year. Exactly. Okay. Now that we got the hard hitting stuff out of the way, let's talk encampments. Obviously, this is a huge issue right now, not just Hamilton dealing with this. Housing, City of Hamilton spending $187 million being spent when it comes to housing. When a constituent comes to you and says, what are we doing about this issue? What can you tell them?
It's a really difficult question, because obviously it's a very complex issue that took decades to get to the point that we are now. So I think, when residents do raise the issue of housing and homelessness, which is by far the biggest issue in the city, and as you say, not just in Hamilton and municipalities across Ontario and across the country, I think we start to talk about some of the root causes in addictions and mental health, and also in just the overall cost of living. And I think all of these issues, housing and homelessness, the cost of housing, the cost of living, these are all related, and they're issues that municipalities are very much struggling to deal with. And you mentioned the cost that City Hamilton property taxpayers are investing in solutions for these problems. $187 million in 1 year. That's $187 million. That's about 5 to 10% of the city's budget. That's not going to core city services like roads and bridges and garbage and that kind of thing. So it has a massive impact on not just our community, but also on the city's finances. And it's something that we're doing our best to mitigate the issues. Mm-hmm. But we need more support from those upper levels of government.
And to that point, the upper levels of government, we've also seen the downloading of so many things onto municipalities. And just recently, it's the development fees that we need these new projects to fund, right? Because otherwise we have new streets, new sewer systems, new parks falling on taxpayers who already live there. Like, it becomes an issue, like this downloading of what municipalities have to pay. How is it being felt at the city?
It's extremely frustrating, because what we're seeing is both the province and the federal government, to a lesser extent, but also the federal government, downloading the costs of their policies to municipalities. Municipalities have the least ability to pay. The only access we have is to property taxes, which is not fair to property taxpayers. We don't have access to income taxes or sales tax as the upper levels of government do. So when, for example, when the federal government puts out a housing policy that says you need to freeze development charges in order to access this funding, the cost for us to freeze development charges is far more than what we would ever get from the provincial government for the program. So that program, before it even starts, is a failure. And we've seen the same from the provincial government. And the issue of the affordability of housing is a real issue, and obviously development charges and taxes and that kind of thing are part of that. But it can't fall to municipalities, and in particular residential property taxpayers, to solve that level of societal problems. It's just, we cannot afford it.
The one thing, and I said this to Councillor Kretsch a few weeks ago too, the idea that being a local councillor, it can be a pretty thankless job sometimes, because you're really dealing with every minute issue that people are dealing with. You're the most accessible to people, right? It's not easy to call up your MPP or to bump into your MP at Fortino's or something like that. It can be a pretty thankless job sometimes. What do you still get out of it?
I actually really love my position, and I thoroughly enjoy what I do. Yes, it certainly can be frustrating, especially on some of these big issues that really municipalities have limited resources to deal with, and that people are extremely frustrated about, encampments and parks being one of them. But at the same time, when you do make impacts and you kind of feel like you're leaving the city a little bit better than it was when you started, that's always been my goal. And, just trying to look out for the quality of life for families and the next generation. I'm a father, I have young kids, and I want Hamilton to be the kind of place where they're going to stay and raise their own families. So, it is satisfying on a certain level to know that you're involved, for better or for worse. But that's I've always tried to ground my decision-making process in that, overall value of Hamilton as a good place to live, to work, and has those kind of opportunities for recreation and, other things that make it a great place to live.
I believe in about a week's time, we'd be hitting 2 years since the last election. So we're just about the halfway point. This was a massive change election when it comes to the horseshoe at City Council. What have you learned in the last 2 years, and how do you feel like this council is finding its footing? I mean, now here we are, like I said, at the halfway point. We should be beyond that. But when there's so many new voices, when there's so many different voices around the table, how have you seen, what the last 2 years have been like from your perspective?
It's been interesting. It's certainly different than last term. I've really enjoyed some of the perspectives from the new councillors, whether we agree or not. I mean, that's part of a democracy, right, is to have those various voices and to be able to have a respectful debate on different issues. I think one of the things that I've found frustrating and somewhat surprising is just the votes of consequence, like whether it's the budget or a response to encampments or, spending decisions, all those votes of consequence come almost down to an exactly 50-50 vote. And that I was surprised, and that's been a trend that's continued. And I think just to a certain extent, it's taken some time for the newer councillors to really understand their role as a municipal councillor, and also the duties that are required of them. Like sometimes, you are put in a position where you need to make one decision that is in the best interests of residents and the best interests of the corporation of the city Hamilton, but it's not going to be popular with residents. And I think, until you have a little bit of experience with that, it's difficult to make those hard choices sometimes. Would
that play into the urban-rural divide of this city? Because it is such a big city, right? And somebody in Waterdown or somebody in Flamborough, their issues are going to look a lot different than somebody's issues in Ward 8 or downtown. I've always found that perspective interesting at council, because it is such a big city geographically, population-wise, of course, but how do you feel that rural-urban divide has been played out here?
I think that's certainly been one of the defining characteristics of Hamilton for a long time. I'd say it's probably less so now than it was in the past. We have some excellent councillors that span both an urban and a rural component to their constituency. And even in Ward 8, a mountain ward, we span almost 100 years of development from at the Brow, to new developments that are still under construction right now. So, there's certainly geographic divisions in issues that are important, stormwater management being one of them, where we saw a very different response from the rural areas than the urban. But I think in the most part, the values of residents across the city are fairly similar. And I think it's something that we as councillors need to find the similarities rather than to focus on, the things that divide us. Growing up in Hamilton, for me, it was always the mountain versus the lower city,
We still get that sometimes. We still hear it. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's a
rivalry.
That's a generational thing, right? Where my grandparents, who, emigrated to Canada, worked in the steel mill, lived next to the steel mill, for them, like, moving up was literally moving up the mountain, right? And you still have those kinds of attitudes that are embedded in, in Hamilton culture. And it's definitely a fascinating phenomenon.
Well, listen, if I had $1 for every time I've heard a Hamilton athlete talk about the blue collar, the effort and what they bring to their jobs as pro athletes, I'd be a very rich man and might be able to afford one of those teams. I want to talk to you about safe consumption because your comments recently have drawn a lot of attention. A plan from the Ontario government to put in vending machines that would distribute safe injection supplies, and that could include needles, as you had an interesting back and forth at the meeting earlier this month. You have an issue with these things being offered in vending machines. What is your issue with this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think most residents would also have an issue, once they find out what it is that is being proposed. And that's, to me anyway, it reminds me of a dystopian future where we have this crushing opioid and addictions crisis, but instead of actually focusing on treatment and solutions, a vending machine that hands out needles and crack pipes and meth bowls, to me, is basically, we've given up. We're all out of ideas, so have at it, whatever. And I think without having any kind of supervision, without having any sort of touch point, whether that's with a healthcare worker or a shelter worker or somebody in a clinic or a place where those supplies would be available, some sort of touch point where an individual that has a severe addictions issue would be able to connect with somebody to have help, to access supports. Just giving away those supplies in a vending machine doesn't do any of that. And I think, it's the wrong way to go from a policy perspective, but also just fundamentally on a societal level, it's just wrong.
So are you supportive of safe injection sites then?
I think safe injection sites are part of that harm reduction continuum. I think we focus so much on the needs of people that are suffering from addictions that at times we forget about or ignore the concerns of just the neighborhood or general residents. For example, on my way here today, I nearly ran into somebody that was suffering from either a mental health or addictions problem, just ran across Main Street, just straight through traffic. And that's somebody that needs support, that needs treatment. And we're not so much talking about how that impacts neighborhoods, how that impacts businesses, how that impacts residents just in their day-to-day lives and our city to be able to, be a viable place to live. So, going back to safe injection sites, we need to consider not just what happens inside that building, but also what happens on the street. And I think we've seen horror stories in Toronto and other places with crime, with vandalism, and with violent crime associated directly with safe injection sites. So if we are going to continue with that, we need to consider those other societal problems. And I think, the provincial government, to their credit, is going the right direction with this. They're investing in treatment-focused heart clinics that are going to, not the safe injection route, but actually focus on treatment. They have funding. The big issue for Hamilton, though, is that we're only, looking at one. I think we need several.
Ontario Big City Mayors met this weekend in Markham, and they've been pushing this for the last few weeks now. It's solve the crisis, and that comes down to calling on the provincial and federal governments to take action now to address what they say is the humanitarian crisis happening on our streets. And I think it's really important that this is coming from big city mayors, of course, but from municipalities, because they are the ones who see it firsthand. Mayors passed a resolution that calls on the provincial government to urgently review, consult on, and update the Mental Health Act and Healthcare Consent Act. One of the big ones that caught my eye, though, was involuntary treatment. in BC. It was part of their recent, very, very tight election this past weekend. Where do you stand when it comes to involuntary treatment and getting people who are suffering addiction, who may not want treatment?
I think we need to be clear that addictions is a healthcare issue. Mental health is a healthcare issue. Healthcare is a provincial jurisdiction. So those issues should be squarely with the provincial government. We've been picking up funding programs for those issues because there's nobody else left. We're funding addiction supports and outreach and all kinds of things because there's nobody left. But what we need and what you're hearing from municipalities across Ontario is that push for the provincial government to step in a meaningful way. I think they're starting to, again, to give them credit. The issue of involuntary institutionalization, for somebody suffering from a severe addictions issue or a mental health issue, again, that's not in any way within the municipality's jurisdiction, but I think anecdotally, you can see people that are suffering. They're a danger to themselves as well as the others, the general community. They're not either capable or willing to make decisions that are in their own best interests. And I think it is, compassionate to have that discussion about, is that somebody that needs to be, assisted with or without their consent, because it's in their best interest. Now, I very much acknowledge that as a very slippery slope, and we've kind of gone away from that many decades ago. It can't just be, we're going to round up anybody that's acting funny and put them in an institution. But I think in certain cases, it is a discussion that we need to have.
I appreciate your insights on that one. Wanted to talk about another issue that's making headlines at Queen's Park these days: bike lanes. There's a bike lane on Stone Church that's got the Premier's attention. A lot of the main ones that have been talked about are, of course, downtown Toronto. Are you where do you stand when it comes to bike lanes, including right through your own ward there on Stone Church?
Well, we've been talking most of this discussion about, areas where we need the provincial government to step in and prioritize their own provincial responsibilities and bring solutions that is in their jurisdiction. Bike lanes is not a provincial jurisdiction. That is a municipal jurisdiction. We decide what roads need different, transportation solutions, whether it's a transit lane, bike lane, wider sidewalks. Like, that is squarely a municipal issue. I see this as a distraction, frankly, by the provincial government. They know that bike lanes are, a hot button issue that generates a whole lot of controversy, and it's a way to distract against some of their inaction on homelessness and the cost of living and housing and the policies that they've put in place that haven't been successful.
Is it an overreach?
Oh, clearly. I mean, the Premier's kind of wants to be the mayor of Toronto or something like that. And it's kind of the same thing with the proposal about the tunnels. I mean, like digging a tunnel under the 401, come on, like obviously that's never going to happen. Yep. But to, somebody that's sitting in traffic and you hear on the radio, Doug Ford wants to dig a tunnel. You're like, yeah, great. Let's dig a tunnel. Let's dig a tunnel from Hamilton straight to downtown Toronto. I get there in half an hour. It'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Under the lake. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not a realistic discussion, and it's a way for the provincial government, in my opinion anyway, to divert from some of those issues where that is their responsibility and that they're really not delivering for Ontarians.
Hamilton Police have kind of reintroduced this program on the downtown beat, and I find it really interesting because we've seen some of the consequences. It really does tie everything what we've been talking together when it comes to the things you're going to deal with. There's also been a massive number of shootings in the city of Hamilton. Let's start there, actually. I think we hit 50 over this past week. Hamilton Police calling on people to stop, put down the guns. As a councillor in the city, what do you make of this spike of shooting in the cities?
It's terrifying. And I think talking to police, a lot of it is just on the availability of firearms, on the availability of guns and guns that are being imported from the United States, obviously. And, a decade ago, 2 decades ago, there just wasn't that availability where somebody would have a gun on their person as, for whatever reason, it would have been a knife or, something else. Mm-hmm. But there's a big difference between, a brawl with baseball bat or knife when somebody pulls out a gun and starts shooting. I know that police are obviously very aware of this issue. It's something that they face on a daily basis, where an officer is pulling over a vehicle and not knowing if somebody, has access to a firearm there, or just in their day-to-day role, and trying to make arrests of where those guns are entering from. But it's also, I think it speaks to the bigger issue of just youth violence, because a lot of the gun crime is associated with gangs and also just youth. A lot of the perpetrators, when you do hear an arrest, they're underage, they're 15, 16, which is even that much more terrifying, with, a 14, 15-year-old shooting, in a neighborhood, and obviously not having a care of where those bullets go or who they might hit. And just tying that together with, more opportunities for youth and outreach, because, for example, Liberty for Youth is an organization that works to get youth opportunities in the trades. And when you talk to them, you're like, if you had a job in the trades, you'd be making 2-3 times the amount that you're making.
Every weekend, me and my friends have that discussion.
Put the gun is the wrong tool. Put the gun down and pick up a welder or something like that. But it takes time, right?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting, to bring up youth here, just because I still think the consequences of the full shutdowns of what we went through. And I think that, the necessity of them for stopping the spread of COVID during an unprecedented time was, we had to do it. The development of kids during that time, though, and then you say that, and, your headline from CHCH last week, talking about that the fatal crash on the link stemmed between fights between kids at 2 local high schools. I mean, I think as a parent of young children, how can we raise better kids?
Yeah, and that's such a tragedy. And I think it's, it's an example of a failure of us as a society to reach the youth that were involved in that. When I heard about it, my first reaction was, obviously it's such an awful tragedy, but then thinking about it, why wouldn't they just call the police? If you thought you were seriously at risk, that's what the police are there for. But I think we've got a society where the police are no longer the helper, the protector, and there's a certain segment that doesn't want to be involved with police in any way, and it filters through in different ways. And unfortunately, I think this is an incident of that.
Interesting. You did something interesting. I got the tape here. For anyone who's ever told you to go jump off a cliff, you finally took them up on it. What are we looking at here? For those who are listening, we are looking at, I believe, Councillor Danko going off the side of a very steep cliff here. What do we got?
That's about a 12-story cliff that I'm rappelling off of in Killarney Provincial Park. So that was just this past weekend. Went on a trip with my friends from university. So that's
and you celebrated with one of the best beers out there, of course, a CHCH Trop Story. I believe last time we had you on here, it was right after the trip as well. I know you've been doing this trip for a long time. But Councillor, I know you're a very busy man. I appreciate you making the time today. A great conversation, some great insights. Appreciate it.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. My thanks to Councillor JP Danko for joining me today. My thanks to you as well. Hey, while you're here, make sure you like and subscribe to CHCH Podcast so you never miss an episode of this show or any of the other great shows we have for you, including Sportsline with Bubba O'Neill. My thanks to Mike Corsten for directing today's episode. And one more time, thank you for listening. From all of us here at CHCH, I'm Louie Bucko. Have a great day.